Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. Well, the real question that has to be asked, why has President Trump backtracked on his tariff policies from just a couple days ago? This is something we are definitely going to look into. Paul, as always, I want to thank you for being a part of the discussion. And it looks like almost immediately when things were starting to heat up in the global financial world, all of a sudden he has pulled back the rug.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining as well, Ken. We thought we'd put this out rather sort of hastily because, yeah, Trump has caved in, capitulated on these tariffs for 90 days. The only thing is, apparently that excludes China. So, in essence, all that is done is signal to the world that the United States has a vendetta against China, has some real issue with China. And that is not going to help the United States' cause. It's not going to endear the United States to global South countries. It will make its allies be even more suspicious of Trump's motivations. But it was very obvious the United States has a real problem with China because China's gone tit for tat. And when the United States increases the percentage, China did likewise and went from 34% to 84%. And then the United States went to 104%. And I think he's put it up, is it 124% now? So
125% now.
125. So when does this end? I mean, but China doesn't care because they've known the United States was going to do this since Trump was re-elected. It was as day follows night, it was very obvious to them what was going on. So, could you fill us in, Ken, on any more of the detail about what other caveats Trump's included in this climb down, cave in with respect to tariffs?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take a look here real quick at what he tweeted out when this change came about. And I think we're going to touch upon some of the things and the reasons why he suddenly had to, and whether at the advice of his people or not. But this is in essence what he said. I have authorized a 90-day pause and a substantially lowered reciprocal tariff during this period, starting today, of 10%, also effective immediately. Now, of course, this is in reference to primarily all the nations that he had on his little colored placards the other day, whether it's Europe, Vietnam, any of the places that have allegedly tariffs from the past going against the United States. But China has been summarily designated and separated from that. And it's kind of interesting because over the course of the last few days, it started out at 34%. China retaliated, and then it went to 80 or 104%. China retaliated 84%, and now after this announcement, it's at 125%. And I think what's important is you hit the nail on the head. China knew that they were under the spotlight in the microscope going back to his first term in office back in 2016. And in that time, China has divested itself of the United States as being the primary exporter or importer of Chinese goods. I think the number is down to just 12% or 3% of GDP. And by diversifying outward, there was a map. There was an interesting map someone showed. In 2000, the United States held the vast majority of the world as a trade partner. And in just 24 years later, China has virtually taken over that entire thing, whether it's Africa, Europe, South America, Australia, et cetera, and the US has dwindled down. So this attack or focus on China is absolutely, I mean, just, I want to say both insane and inane. And you have to wonder about the type of advice or advisors that are part of the Trump administration to even implement this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing to note about this, they are trying to sound like they're all not caving in, but it's a goodwill gesture because all these countries have agreed to have discussions with us. So we don't need to have these tariffs necessarily in place anymore, pending all these discussions. And then, oh, we're not removing these tariffs because it had anything to do with the bond markets, etc., etc. Well, it absolutely had everything to do with the bond markets because when they applied tariffs, they expected the yields to drop and the yields would continue to fall. And that would force the Fed to slash interest rates because they will have to roll over all the US debt for a substantial amount this year, about 9 trillion. Well, they'd rather the interest rates were a lot lower in having to do that. That's a statement of fact and is obvious. Well, of course, that failed because they had a little spurt where the rates fell and then the 10-year got to 4.5%. The 30-year crossed 5%. It's a bit below that now, but they were having huge problems in that going the wrong way. Then, of course, the US dollar was getting hit as well. I mean, this is unprecedented. You would never see in a situation like this where there's perceived to be some sort of market crisis developing for everyone to pile out of the dollar and to pile out of US treasuries, symptomatic of the fact the world is de-dollarizing, and also a lack of trust in the US Treasury, US dollar complex as being a safe haven, which we've talked about for quite a long time. The other problem is they didn't think the equity markets getting smashed was a problem. Well, because every company's balance sheet is geared around these fictitious valuations, when those valuations fall, then all of a sudden their balance sheet risk's been impaired, and therefore that was also a serious problem which they should have understood and clearly didn't. And therefore it started to get to the point as well where in the financial system itself there was huge stresses and strains. There was liquidity problems, interbank lending problems, and from my perspective, I think it's very obvious that we'd started to reach a very uncomfortable situation that was developing in those markets there with regards to banks and structural problems in the banks. And someone has probably picked up the phone to somebody inside the Trump administration and gone, look, you're having serious troubles. There are serious problems developing the bond markets. There's serious problems to do with the dollar. You cannot allow these equity markets to capitulate, and you're causing problems in the banking system. And obviously, you're also causing problems with financial institutions because of all the margin calls and the leverage. Okay, they shouldn't have these, but they do. And then you're seeing institutions capitulate, and you're causing way too much volatility, and you're going to have to just walk away from this. So there was rumors a couple of days ago they were looking at a 90-day pause. I think someone's gone enough's enough because you are literally at the risk of causing a Lehman 2.0 event, which, you can argue, is that reality? Yes, very much so. Does it mean it happens today or tomorrow? Not necessarily, but it's on the cards, and therefore you would have to then take that action to try and take some of the heat out of the problems in the market. Because bearing in mind, when China today upped the tariff rate to 84%, the market reacted extremely badly to China's actions in terms of equities, where equities fell probably about 4 or 5%, maybe a bit more. Also, we noticed there was, well, more so a big recovery in gold. Gold moved over 100 ounces from its intraday low to its high. I mean, and okay, silver less so, but still there was definitely a change with respect to silver in terms of the price increasing. And so all the metrics were still lining up going, well, China putting tariffs on the United States is clearly seen as a big problem. When the United States puts them on China, the market doesn't react positively. And why should it? Because it's not a positive for the US. It's so nothing in this situation works out for the United States in any way, shape, or form. And then, of course, what do we see? This announcement comes out. So the dollar bounces back, but now the dollar's flat on the day. Gold and silver are up, well, silver 3.6%, gold 3.5%, both up over, well, in the case of silver, over $1. In the case of gold, $100. The equity markets, yeah, definitely saw a bit of a spike, but and they kind of seem to be up around 6-7%, stayed that way. But it hasn't improved the situation with the bond markets appreciably. So has the problem gone away in making this announcement? Well, we'll see in the next day or two what the market reaction is, but they're not out the woods with this. But in a more important way, all this is demonstrated to the rest of the world is, despite all the claims of to the contrary and trying to hide the reality of what an absolute debacle these tariffs are, how the United States is weak economically, weak financially. I mean, there's already situations where the Trump administration was looking to have to bail out sectors in the US economy because of Chinese tariffs, like the farmers, for example. The US is weak in every aspect of the economy, the financial system, its bond markets, the dollar, etc., and they've been exposed. For that being the case, the world knows this. More importantly, the Chinese know this, and therefore China's just going to sit there and go, well, okay, don't remove the tariffs. We're just going to keep matching you. Don't be surprised if China comes out tomorrow and ups them again. And, if the United States wants a trade war with China, China's ready for it. And people in the West need to wake up that China has an arsenal of weapons at its disposal that can cause the United States enormous pain, like no other nation can. And the US needs to walk away and realize that they can't fight these battles anymore. The dollar isn't what it once was. Their economy, their financial system is so perilous. And this is what happens since all the nonsense we've seen since 2008 with endless bailouts, QE, zero interest rate policy, and just faking and fudging all the economic data to give the impression everything's fine when it's not. And the problems stemmed before 2008 because 2008 was just an indication of the failure of financialization, which started in the 80s. And nothing's going to change unless the United States behaves like an adult, sits down with the Chinese, whoever else, actually comes to an agreement and an understanding that the old Bretton Woods system's dead, that the post 1971 world is dead, the US dollar as a world reserve currency is over. The US is not going to be in a position anymore to print lots of dollars and then buy goods from all over the world. But if the US wants to reindustrialize, there is an enormous gargantuan task ahead of them. And they're going to need global support to do this. And that doesn't involve bullying nations. And if they really want to continue to have a bully China and try this, China will cause them immense pain. And it will not end pretty for the United States. Whatever anyone listening thinks, and I'm not getting into specifics, but you have been fed the biggest load of nonsense about China for the last 20 years by a whole raft of people who know nothing about China, people with an ulterior motive. You need to understand that China is everything you don't think it is, and it's nothing that you think it is. And if you get a chance, go there, see it for yourself. You'll be amazed that how it's transformed as a country in 20 years. And it knows what Trump's been proposing to do. It's ready for it. It's taken a lot of already precautionary measures to deal with this. It's changing its economy anyway, and it can deal with this problem. The United States, if it's already having to bail out sectors before any of the tariffs have really kicked in tells you how fragile the US economy is. We know how fragile the US financial system is, and China doesn't have those problems, contrary to all the statements that people have heard. So this is a clear capitulation because somebody's got on the phone and gone, if you don't do this and you persist with these ridiculous, idiotic policies that's wrecking everything in the United States, economically and financially, then you're going to cause a Lehman type event if you persist with this, because all the data out there supports this. It's irrefutably the case. So, and everybody who understands the financial system understands economies, but more so, as we said earlier, the Chinese know that the United States has held up the white flag because the alternative is the kind of capitulation that the Trump administration cannot be seen to be in basically being responsible for with this crassly idiotic tariff policy, which nobody thought through. It was just a typical bulldozing operation where the US thinks we're the hegemonic power, we can do what we like. There are no consequences for the United States. Well, there are consequences. We'll see what happens in 90 days' time, and we'll certainly look with interest to see what happens going forward with respect to China.
Exactly. And, I know we've done a number of tariff podcasts of recent note, but the thing that really you have to take a look at is I am starting to see what the Trump administration has done with this tariff policy as sort of a ripping the Band-Aid from a cut that hasn't fully healed and pretty much hasn't healed at all. Because what it's done is overnight. I mean, we have the podcast out regarding potential financial crisis in Europe. Uh, it hasn't been China that's been dumping bonds, treasuries. It's been Japan because they have a crisis under their own. The Bank of Japan owns two-thirds of their stock market, plus virtually all their bond market. What you mentioned earlier about U.S. corporations, they don't actually sell a whole bunch of things in relation to what they did in the past. It's all about using equities, buying back their stock, cheap credit that has kept their balance sheets afloat for this entire time. Now, all of a sudden, you throw this force majeure out there into the world, and everybody's panicking. From Macron saying that he wants to force French companies to leave the United States. To let me see some of the others that came across because they were important. An ex-Japanese FX diplomat said he's not. Trump's not going to get a Plaza Accord type of deal with the dollar. There's talk about the dollar days over because what's going to happen is you're going to see the way China has positioned itself through diversification and de-dollarizing and the multipolar world creation over the past 7, 8, 10 years. More and more nations are going to do this. And we've been hearing, obviously you've heard as well, Europe wants to move back into China's, have closer alliances with China because they don't want to have to deal with the United States as well as have to be under the thumb as vassalage. So this attempt to quote unquote make America great again may have just revealed to the world just how fragile financialization in the entire unipolar world is. And more than anything, it could force nations or regions to have to make changes that are not going to be beneficial to the US.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from my perspective, a final point I'd like to make is, you know, the Trump administration had this plan, and this plan was we're going to tariff the world, they're going to subjugate to us, we're going to get the yields on across the entire bond market yield curve down. The dollar will stay strong. Uh, the equities don't matter. We'll get through this, and we'll come out the other side based on our Liberation Day nonsense, and we'll be the winners. And everyone else will capitulate, including the Chinese. Remember, Trump only the day when China wants a deal, they just don't know how to do this, or I mean, and of course was absolute rubbish. And on the basis of all this, they had this plan. They were going to basically force everyone to do as they were told, and it's failed. It has failed totally. So now the US is having to backtrack and make all manner of bogus claims as to why they're backtracking, but it's been a total failure. And we said from day one that it would be a total failure. And that's the reality. It's another complete botch job by the United States, who never thinks through the consequences of its actions, never understands the complexities of how financial markets operate, how economies operate. They don't understand supply chains. They don't understand what reindustrialization means. They have no comprehension. They just think that it's all a light switch moment. They click their fingers and everything's going to work. And the US is proposing the most absolutely crassly idiotic ideas how because they've decided to abandon a global uh, basically trade and commerce model that they implemented, because they don't like it anymore because it's failing them. They want to force everyone onto a new rules-based order, which won't work at all. But they want to basically extort and screw the rest of the world, as they have done, particularly since 1971, where basically everyone had to accept worthless bits of paper, and the US got lots of printed money to go and buy cheap goods around the world, which without these cheap goods, the United States would have long since ended up in an inflationary depression. And it comes back to the point, without the dollar as the world reserve currency, the United States would be an economic and financial third world nation. People don't like that, but it's the truth. And the US can't now decide, well, we don't like this anymore, but we still want to be the world reserve currency and dominate everything as we always did. But you're going to also now have to pay the privilege of rebuilding the United States. And so we'll give you worthless bits of paper. You give us a whole bunch of printed money, and we'll rebuild America on the back of you. I mean, this is the kind of nonsense they think should happen. And the world will say absolutely not. And we'll see what happens, because they may try and walk away from this and make all manner of claims that, oh, we've negotiated deals with all these countries, and just pretend this never happened. But they'll have to keep going with China. And after all, the only nation that really matters in this is China. And that's the idiotic part, because this trade war hasn't ended. The problems for the US markets haven't ended. The problems have only just started. And if this carries on, tit for tat, then we're going to be getting into an even worse situation with respect to bonds, with respect to equities, and with respect to interbank lending, etc. And the very heartbeat of the Western financial system becomes more and more precarious.
Absolutely. And to everybody here, obviously, this whole event before us is not over, and we'll be sure to keep you updated on anything important that we come across. Paul, as always, I want to thank you for being a part of this discussion and for your great insight.
Yes, and likewise.
And to everybody here at the Sirius Report community, thank you for all of your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.